need to do something? I got minutes.
Okay.
Oh.
I will say they're nice.
Okay.
Haven't been here before.
No, never been.
Oh, then let me put you on to some drinks and.
All right.
It's banging. Okay, we're like, hey y'all, sorry, we're just up here having a hoot and a holler. And y'all, welcome you guys. Thank you for coming in. I know it's a week later, but Indianapolis was still under a travel advisory last week, and we just felt like it was probably best to delay and not clog up the streets while everything was still getting plowed. I live about an hour south of here, and it took a long time to get everything drivable. Even once the travel advisory lifted here, I was like, I had like 3 or 4 more inches of snow, and I didn't think that was a lot of extra snow. But maybe it's because I'm from south. I just have not. This is the most snow I've ever experienced. I know some people probably laugh at that, but this is the most, and it was a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you're only 20 minutes away, but I got to set it, so that's like,
Yeah.
can't really handle that much snow.
Yeah, that was a lot for me. So be gentle on my little southern heart. So thank you guys for coming and learning how things are made. Before we start, I just want to give a huge shout out, obviously, to Indiana Sciences and Indiana Humanities who help us put this on, and then obviously Strangebird. If you are watching on the live stream and you have not been out to Strangebird, you've got to come out. A hot bowl of ramen on a cold daylight, ooh, it hits. It's good any time of year, but especially in the winter, y'all, it just hits different. So come out to Strange, and their drinks are really good. I was just telling you, drinks are very good. I can't have most of them because I'm allergic to pineapple. And they have like the tiki vibe, but highly encourage it. Anyway, so thank you guys so much. And I try some drinks our guests, but I feel like you know yourself best. So Matt, and if you know yourself best. So if you've been with us before, you might know. Who are you?
All right. So my name's Matt Sowers. I am a mechanical engineer by trade. I was classically trained in the arts of the dark arts of mechanical engineering. It is the most redneck version of engineering sciences there is out there because we just slap stuff together and make sure it goes. So our qualification for what good is does it work? And that sometimes is akin to our friends in manufacturing, which is how I got invited to talk about this in the first place, is I rub elbows with those folks a lot. So I graduated from Purdue in 1995 and got a professional engineer's license in mechanical engineering in the state of Indiana in 2003. I have spent maybe the first 10 years of my career in consumer electronics working on things like printers and keyboards at places like IBM and Lexmark, and then later at RCA back when there were telephones that hung on walls and televisions made from glass and things like that. Yeah.
RCA.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So for those of you who live down south, you've probably heard of them. And then in 2003, I started working for Roche Diagnostics here in Indianapolis, which is a blood glucose manufacturing or blood glucose monitoring company, as well as they primarily do pharmaceuticals. But I worked in diabetes care for handheld blood glucose meters and stuff like that for hospitals. And then after about 16 years there, I got to spend a few years working at a contract manufacturer that makes various sorts of products, so very much on the manufacturing side. And then for the last few years was at Dexcom out in San Diego, who makes continuous glucose monitoring devices. So a medical device where you basically stick it on your skin. It's got a wire that hangs into your flesh, talks to your phone, and tells it what your blood glucose is. So the connecting thread between all of these is they are high volume production microelectronics devices that are used by end consumers who are generally not trained in the arts of what this stuff is and how it works and what it's for. So it requires a lot of good design. So I do a lot of design engineering and focus on that so that when somebody gets the thing, they can figure out how to use it from the instruction card, the pictures on the box, the quick start guide, the video online, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Assuming that it has to be pretty simple. Again, as I was saying, it's not a good design if you have to explain it. When it comes to a hammer, you got to know which end is the holdy end and which is the poundy end. And that's how you know what good design is. So from manufacturing, and that's what all of this stuff is talking about, is once you've gotten to the point where you've got a design, now how do I build them? Do I need 100 or 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million, 10 million, 100 million, a billion? Those all take different types of approaches to how the manufacturing is applied and what the manufacturing sciences are behind it.
So as an engineer then, and how are you interacting with manufacturers? Do you just design it and go, this isn't my problem? Or are you working with the manufacturers to, is there a compromise?
All of those are true.
Okay.
And it depends on the product,
Okay.
right? So
Oh,
sorry,
okay.
I'll give you the engineering response. It depends.
Yeah, no,
So-
we love it.
So for sometimes, some places are like, hey, can you just do the design for us? And I'm like, cool, can you tell me how it's made? They're like, we don't know which factory we're putting this in. So if you don't know which factory you're putting this in, I cannot design the thing to fit in your factory. So instead, what I do is I use good design practices that most factories would want to use. So I'm not going to use magic screws made of, you know, spider webs and stuff like that. I'm
Yeah.
just going to go get stuff that you could pick up at Lowe's. So I try to make then, if I'm going to drive a screw into a thing, I try to make that there's a boss there that receives that screw. And I might have a drawing that says, use this kind of screw. But it's predicated on something that's talked in the book here about standardization of components. So I have to get an idea about what standard means. So if I ask you something like, hey, have you used a Phillips head screwdriver before? Most people have.
Yeah.
Is that a standard thing? There was one time where that was not. There was one time where screws didn't exist. There was, right? So
True, man.
what point in history, what sort of technology?
Yeah.
Standardized stuff quickly becomes not standard when you realize if you use plumbing parts for your hot tub, they're different from the same literal specification of plumbing parts for your refrigerator, plumbing parts for your sink, plumbing parts for your dishwasher, and for your washing machine. All of those have different plumbing standards, but they all move water. And
Yeah.
that was particularly frustrating when I needed to find a, you know, an elbow for my ice maker. And I'm like,
Listen.
why is it like this?
Yeah, why is it slightly different?
Yeah.
So then what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
That's a great question too. So this is evolutionarily speaking, we know it was both, right?
Yeah.
So that means both. Both is the answer. So
Okay.
both manufacturing and design happened at the same time. And the best analogies I can think of are for food. So at a certain point, somebody wanted to eat. And we have evolved to a point where food that's cooking smells good. Raw cow doesn't smell great. Raw pig doesn't smell great. So we've evolved to a point where our senses are attuned to cooked food. So we've been eating food over fire for so long. The process for cooking had to be acquire meat first, then make fire. So there's already two process steps, right? So get meat,
Yeah.
get fire. So you can have a fire person and you can have a meat person, a hunter,
Yeah.
and have those two work together and eventually get food. Well, then they introduced a cook, a third person now, who's a master of taking the meat and exposing it to the heat in just such a way to make it tasty.
Yeah.
And
Not burnt.
not have, you know, things still living inside it or whatever, right? You know,
It's true.
so there's a method for cooking. And then there's, oh, well, maybe you would like some spices on there. So where do we get salt? Where do we get pepper? Where do we get things? So each of those takes a step. So each of these then become manufacturing. So did come before salt? Did, right? You know, so which of these things does the human body need? As it turns out on your tongue, it's not a pepper detector, but there are salt detectors on your tongue, right?
Yeah.
So that tells us that salt is critical to the evolution of our species because we need it for the electrolytes in our body and to make our brain go.
Yeah.
So we are naturally attuned to find things like fat and sugar and salt. These are things we got to have or we don't go.
Yeah.
So to fill that need somewhere along the way, somebody added these things into these processes, and it happened before we ever learned to cook. It happened before we ever learned to hunt. It happened before we knew how to make fire.
Yeah.
So that's why these things evolved at the same time with us. So all of this stuff, cooking, language, whatever, engineering, design, these are all part of the modes of society in which we operate. And as our society gets more complex, we get to add complexity to it. So the existence of mechanical engineers was not required by humanity up until the last 150 years or so,
Yeah.
right? And that engineering discipline is called civil engineering as opposed to the engineering discipline before that, which was for war engines. So things like trebuchets and catapults predate cars
Yeah.
because we were making war with being clever, being ingenious, where the word engineer comes from is the same root as the word ingenious. Some ingenious person figured out a way to chuck rocks at the side of a big building.
Yeah.
And that's the thing they use. So then the people who decided to build the buildings with things instead of just chucking rocks at it were called civil engineers, because they were building things for civilians. And then eventually later, the joke goes, civil engineers build targets, mechanical engineers build weapons. That was the first division. Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, horrible joke. All right.
Well, so then is this something because I think when I think of engineers and I think of like schooling for engineer, you think of, oh, it's a lot of math. I would have never thought about the practicality of okay, you have a concept and a design, you actually have to go make it.
Yes.
How is that taught to you? Like, I guess
The wrong way.
introduced to? Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You tell them.
Well, no. So, I mean, they teach you the principles about what all the stuff is, right? So, like, somebody teaches you 1 + 2 = 3. Okay, why? Why does 1 + 2 = 3? They don't tell you when you're 6 that it's a linear transformation between vector spaces, and that's how addition works. That's going to confuse people. So, explaining them that math is a game that is made up for us to be able to count things higher than what we can count on our fingers doesn't make a whole lot of sense to them. So instead, we have you play games and you learn this stuff by rote. And then eventually you learn how to apply it. So the first time I understood what engineering was for was in a humanities class called The History of Science and Technology in Western Civilization that I took at Purdue.
Yeah.
So this talks about the progression of the use of power, which is kind of what engineering does. Let's start with the definition there. So engineering is really the science of the study and application of the movement and storage of energy. So all we're trying to do is generate energy, move it, and do stuff with it.
Yeah.
So that's frequently reduced to the lift of a weight. So we use something to describe that called work. And then when you do work in a period of time, you get power. So if I can apply this much work in this much time, it takes this much power to do it.
Yeah.
So you can talk about things like horsepower. So a human is about 1/8 horsepower generator, 1/4 if they work real hard at it for short periods of time.
Yeah.
So about an hour, you can generate 1/4 of a horsepower. So, but this is how they were like, okay, we're going to limber this horse up to this mill and have them grind flour.
Yeah.
We're going to hook them up to this mill and pump. So that was the first applications for this. And we, ran for about, in Western 1,000 years. And the first thing that he came up with was sort of the sail, right? And so there's a certain, computation that you can do for the surface area of the sail and how much wind it can collect versus how much weight of a ship it can push through the water. So that's a computation you can sort of do.
Yeah.
Making aqueducts, I need to have water fall a certain distance to move this weight of a water wheel. And is an undershot or overshot water wheel better? Do I want the water coming over the top, or do I just stick the wheel in the stream and let it spin? Those were discussions that, lasted for hundreds of years before people really figured out the science behind it.
Yeah.
So this is what taught me about the application for then manufacturing. What happens if you want to make more than one wheel?
Yeah.
What happens if you want to make more than one aqueduct? What happens if you want to make more than one boat? As it turns out, inside the boat are several nails. How do you make more than one nail? How do you make more than one hammer? So more than one person can work on hammering things at the same time in the same boat. Where do you get your boards from? Is it one person making all the boards and they just make one board, go cut down a tree and make one more board and then put that in the ship and then go cut down another tree, right?
Yeah.
So you start processing this differently. So humans began to figure out some sort of, as we called it, industry.
Mhm.
Well, I'm a lumberjack. That's the shirt, right? It's the lumberjack shirt. That's how you can tell. So
So you know.
this is how you know I'm the guy who cuts down trees. And then there's a different guy, a sawyer, who would saw the boards into their shapes. And then you would have somebody who was a blacksmith who would make the hammers and he would make the nails, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And so the specialization, the human specialization, as Heinlein says, is for insects. But the point is that this is how we do industry. This is how you can throw a whole bunch of people at one problem and make really big things like a ship that doesn't fit on your table at home. You have to, if you want to make something bigger in a table or bigger in a house, it's going to take more than one people. Even a barn raising takes
It's
multiple
a lot of
humans
people.
to
Yeah.
stand up at least one portion of that barn. So humans working together then is something we're programmed to do, right? I mean, we've evolved with language. We have variegated pharynx. We have the ability to choke on our food that animals that don't speak don't, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so this is how we know it's important to our species, is because apparently talking is more important than not choking on food. Like,
Who'd have thought?
yeah, we're like the only species that does that, right?
Amazing.
So when you look at that, then it's somehow that we have adapted to this degree of industry. So we should probably do something with it.
Yeah.
And then society helps us do that. And if we talk about it ahead of time, that's the planning portion.
Yeah.
And then it goes into what we have. This is how we can specialize in design. This is how I can exist as a person, is because I have other people who do molds, and I have other people who do plastics, and I have other people who do metals, and I have people who do assembly and whatever. And I
Yeah.
just learn all of the stuff that they need for this to not be bad. And then I try
Yeah.
to make the design be good for them to work with.
Yeah. So you bring up an interesting point. You're like, oh, there's other people who make this part or this
Mhm.
part. So the author talks about vertical versus horizontal.
Sure.
Is one better than the other, or like, can you walk us through, I guess,
Sure.
the advantage, like the pros and cons, I guess, of each approach to manufacturing something?
Right. So there's basically two kind of axes that we can talk about this. So vertical and horizontal integration, and then we can talk about batch processing and continuous
Yeah,
processing.
that's true.
So if we think about this in, two different axes, let's
Actual
talk.
vertical and
Yeah,
horizontal.
exactly. So the vertical and horizontal processing industry means that if I am vertically oriented as a company, that means in the case of, say, Ford in 1910 or Lexmark in 1970, or excuse me, IBM in 1970, you would
Yeah.
just put raw materials in one side of the building. And in the case of Ford, you have finished cars rolling out the other side of the building. Or in IBM in 1970, you would put plastic and metal in one side of the building, and you get functioning Selectric 2 typewriters rolling out the other side of the building, right?
Yeah.
In boxes and everything.
Yeah.
So the raw materials of what these things were harvested in the very first process step. So
Yeah.
instead of having trees coming in, you would have lumber. So it's
Yeah.
been processed once into boards.
Yeah.
But then after that, off it goes. And same with, I get sheet metal in. That's been processed, right? We've taken the ore from the earth, we've smelted it into
Yeah.
ingots, we've hammered the ingots into coils of metal. So there's been several processing steps, but still you can't use a big old coil of metal. That's not like, okay, we're ready to go.
Yeah.
We have to turn that into something, right? So then we would split it into things that make springs, say, or things that make the carriers for keys or whatever that
Yeah.
might be on your typewriter.
So is it better than to just if I'm saying I want to manufacture a car, I'm better off just bringing in all the raw materials, or am I better off finding suppliers that are already making those parts? Is it more
Right.
economical to make it yourself versus buying it out?
Right.
Is
So
it
this
cheaper? Is it
So this is the
worse?
classic problem in the engineering thing. What does better mean?
well, that's true.
So better can be higher value to the consumer, which means that it works better,
Yeah.
or better can be better for the investors who make more money.
Yeah.
Generally, those two things are diametrically opposed.
Okay.
And so with horizontal integration, which is where we're at today,
Mhm.
nobody makes their own stuff. They only kind
Okay.
of do one step along the way. So I
Okay.
talked about all those steps to get the metal to the door. There's going to be a sheet metal stamper who stamps the sheet metal into the parts that you need and sends you the already finished parts.
Mhm.
So instead of, IBM making springs for typewriters anymore, they just get the finished fabricated spring already oriented in some sort of packaging
Okay.
that is an automated thing. So a robot will pull it out of the package and put it in its spot. There's not
Okay.
even a human involved, which means there's a whole industry of people who just make robots. And then there's a whole industry of people who make tape and reel feed that goes into to present it to the robot in such a way that the robot can handle it because it doesn't have fingers. So we have to then adapt a thing for fingers and make a machine that works that way.
Yeah.
And then we have to have something further that does the next step in assembly and so forth until you have the finished manufactured device. So then that's at a manufacturer, typically a contract manufacturer.
Yeah.
Then at the end of that, they'll put it into crates, and then that crate gets sent off to a shipper. And the shipper will put it into some sort of box, and they'll put the instruction book in there for whatever language it is for the country it's going to, and then they'll put the box around it that has the right language, and then they ship it off to a warehouse. And then you have a logistics company, and the logistics company takes it from the warehouse to the retailer, or from the warehouse to your front door, or wherever it's going to go. And those are each different companies. So this horizontal integration then is better in the case of now we have something to sell.
Yeah.
But what it creates in the meantime is a whole new logistics nightmare called a supply chain.
Yeah. It
So
seems like a nightmare.
Yeah.
From your standpoint, from the engineering standpoint, is it harder is it easier to design product because you have a catalog to look at and go, I have all these different screw options, I have all these different metal stamping options. Is it easier for you because some of that has been taken off of, I guess, the mental load, or
again,
is
there's
it harder
pluses and
because
minuses.
it's,
That's right.
oh, okay, well, we have 4 options. One's in China, one's in Canada, and I mean, like that, is that something that you're even considering when you're designing?
Right.
a
So
product?
that we absolutely are. And that is
Oh,
part
okay.
of this difference between, so the other axis I was going to, we mentioned earlier. So
Oh,
I've
yeah.
got this continuous versus batch process.
Yeah,
So if I am making 100 of these things, then I want to be as vertically integrated as possible. I want to smell the breath of the person who's doing the assembly,
yeah.
right? Because I need to know that guy can carve stuff out of a block of wood or whatever,
Yeah.
because he's going to be sitting there with balsa wood and a pocket knife.
Yeah.
And that's how he's making these, because we're only making 100,
Yeah.
right? We don't need any tooling or whatever,
Yeah.
which is way different than if I'm making 1 billion of something.
Yeah.
So in the case of Roche that made 3.8 billion strips a year, how do you make 3.8 billion of a thing?
Of anything.
Right. So there's a continuous web of material that comes pre-plated with this gold on there, and you zorch the surface of it with a laser, and it burns basically some of the plastic away and the gold along with it. And you collect that in a filter or whatever, but it leaves a circuit board behind. So then you can put your magic goo, the reagent, on one end, and then you have the electrode exposed on the other end, and then you put another film over the top of it, basically some sticky tape.
Yeah.
And now I have sandwiched the circuit that is a very high precision technical circuit that is made with 30 nanometers thick of gold. That's 100 atoms of gold, by the way. That's how thick the metal is. And that is enough for us to carry the signal of when somebody bleeds on the end of the strip or puts a blood drop in there, it mixes with the magic goo, and the signal is picked up by the strip connector that's on the other side that's in the meter. And then that makes this thing that's pennies that you can buy for pennies, use,
Yeah.
and you get an incredibly accurate test for the value of your blood glucose.
Wow.
So when you're making billions of those things, because every diabetic, of which there are about 55 million type 1 diabetics worldwide, and they're using 10 tests per day,
Yeah.
55 million times 10 tests a day, we need a lot of strips.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That equals a lot.
Right. And these people die. Right.
Yeah.
So the consequence of us not figuring this out is people die. So
Yeah.
we don't want that to happen. So
Yeah.
for us not, wanting that to not happen, we have to come up with a way of making that stuff and making it work reliably, like a medical device. And later we could talk about this, as they mentioned standards in the book. Those things have a standard of like 95% accuracy with a 95% confidence interval.
Oh, wow.
That's medical. That
Well,
it's
yeah.
got to work. It absolutely has to work, So
Yeah.
when people's lives depend on a thing, then that affects what we're doing. So the
Yeah.
reason we go to a continuous process like that is not just for the volume, but also for the consistency in which you make it. So then if we bring this analogy then to food, McDonald's is the consistency of food. It ain't great, but it's always
you
the
know
same.
what you're getting.
Always,
Yeah.
no matter where you go.
Yes.
If I want a better meal, I'm going to come to a place like this,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I know that I'm going to get more value for my money because somebody cared about it. There's an artisan here who's making that, and there is a quality
Yeah.
of the food. So when you ask me which one is better, if I need to spend $5 and feed myself, maybe that's not here. But
Yeah.
if I want a real meal of real food that's made by real hands, that was made from a real animal,
Yeah.
that probably had a name on a farm somewhere, then I'm going to come here.
Yeah.
Right.
That makes
and
sense.
so that's the inverse proportion of cost versus delivery, or
Yeah.
profit versus utility. So if I were to, look at how these things are spread, the different ways of thinking of it is in terms of benefit to the user, benefit to the consumer, and benefit to the provider. So if there isn't a company, the company doesn't make it. But the cost of supply, is the supply side economics is always, human and environmental, right? We always seem willing to enslave humans, for lack of a better description. And, when you look at half the ships on the sea are moving only fuel, we talk about this even in the prologue, right? We're based on the supply side economics, which really drives production and cost down, which creates a new problem
Yeah.
of the environmental issues and the logistics around that.
Oh, yeah. Well, and so I think that's a great point. And I want that to lead us into our first turn and talk. before we even get into our turn talk, I just want to, I'm going to be really honest, and I want to know if you guys are going to be honest. How many of you before, and I'll say not even this book, I'll say COVID-19, because I think the author really, if you, whether you read the book or not, I think we can all agree that a lot of us became aware of things like manufacturing and supply chain logistics. Hey, not something I thought about on the daily. Like when I walked into
Yeah, what does the term
Kroger,
supply chain mean to you? Right.
Yeah, well, in 2017, didn't mean much of anything. I know where I work at Lilly, they're across the hall, they have a nicer bathroom. That's about all I knew about the supply chain logistics team, is that they had a nicer bathroom and they had the sparkling water. So I was over there regularly. But post COVID-19, it seemed like everybody suddenly was very hyper aware. And so is that, first off, we can just do a show of hands. Does that message ring true? Does that feel accurate to you? Or is supply chain logistics something you woke up at 18 and you were like, I love supply chain logistics? And as we talked about even before this, supply chain, that's a whole field of study that you can get a degree. I mean, it's a whole field of study. So I would love a raise your hand if you pre-COVID-19 didn't even know what this was, and now you're hyper aware of things like manufacturing and supply chain logistics post-COVID. If it's something that even during COVID you were like, oh, I'm learning so much about this. Now, for anybody, was it the Suez Canal? Was it the ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal? Was anyone like, oh, I'm learning about global logistics in a way that I'm seeing head nods. Okay, I'm glad it's not just me. But reading this book, one of the, now actually getting to our turn and talk, because I just wanted to have a real leveling moment with you all, that this is not something that I woke up thinking about for the majority of my life. And I think this book was really eye-opening. And you talked about the environmental impacts. And towards the end of the book, the author really talks about the environmental impact of manufacturing, and he uses concrete as a really great example, which I had no idea how carbon intensive that was. One of my turn and talk for you all is, do you consider environmental impact in your purchasing habits? And if you do, whose responsibility do you think it is to be considerate of that impact, or to even regulate or be responsible for that environmental impact, especially when we talk about horizontal, when we talk about how everything, you're getting a million parts from a million people all getting shipped in and traded in. Who, at the end of the day, when you buy that product, who should have the responsibility for that environmental impact? Is it you as the consumer? Is it the company who's making whose label is slapped on the final product? Is it each step in between? How are you thinking about that when you think about manufacturing? Because that's not something I had really considered. So I'll give you guys, if you're new here for Books Booze, I probably should have introduced this concept. I'll give you a few minutes to talk about the concept, talk about the idea, the question, and then we'll come back and we'll share. And you and me will continue to talk for our live stream. And then we'll share what we talked about, because I'm curious how other people kind of see this, because I think it's a headline right now. So maybe you're thinking about it and you have lots of ideas and lots of thoughts and opinions. I didn't really until I had read this book. So I'll give you guys a few minutes and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the environmental impact on manufacturing and supply chain logistics. Really is. So then as an engineer, how do you think about environmental impact of your product? Do you think about it when you're designing it? Do you feel I don't how do you even approach that? Because I mean, that seems almost secondary or tertiary to the actual
Yeah.
product.
So it's an individual choice first and foremost, right?
Oh,
So
okay. So there's
so-
no like standard, like it needs to be.
there's some stuff that's standard. So
Oh,
some
okay.
companies are like, hey, we have a standard for we don't produce these things because we're a
Oh.
zero waste company.
But it's a
or
company standard.
That's
like,
a company standard. But
okay.
as an individual, it's up to you to how to comply with it. Now,
Yeah.
it just so happens that I am an individual who recognizes that cost can be tied to positive environmental impact, right? In other words, you don't want to disturb the environment, and you can actually make things cost less as a result of not harming the environment.
Yeah.
So going after certain technologies, certain methods or certain materials can allow you to basically do the right thing.
yeah.
So for me, it's a big hairy deal because that's just who I am as a person, right?
Yeah.
And so I make sure that I put that into everything that I do. So, for example, in the medical world, we don't really care about medical waste. We just incinerate it in most countries. So that means if I need to make a thing and it's a consumable, which means it's for safety reasons, I don't want to.
Or yeah.
What if I have tuberculosis and I hand you a strip? You
Yeah,
can
a
use the
used
strip
test
again. Yeah,
strip.
bro,
Yeah.
that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Or here's my used needle
Yeah.
where people are transmitting tuberculosis and HIV and STDs
Yeah.
in old people, in old folks'
yeah,
homes,
yeah,
as it were,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because they're sharing needles because they don't want to, spend money on.
Mhm.
So it's on me to try to make that thing so damn cheap that they'll do the right thing,
Yeah.
or that it's easy enough to do it that people will do the right thing.
Yeah.
So part of that's in design. So then instead of me just choosing a material like, oh, I could do this out of any old polyester, well, that's made out of dinosaur juice. And we have a limited amount of dinosaur juice left on the planet, right? And we tend to
Yeah.
prefer to use that dinosaur in our cars, even though there's a lot of plastics and stuff that are out there. So
Wow.
choosing to make, recycle, reuse, reduce things is up to the engineer. But it's always an easy sell because our management loves it when we come up with something that looks or sounds green. And so it just is the easy thing to do.
Okay.
So instead of me choosing that material for these strips, I might choose something like polylactic acid, which is made from corn oil. So it's a renewable resource.
Yeah.
So why would I make my packaging out of birch paper when I can make it instead out of bamboo, which is 1,000 times more renewable than any of these other things?
Yeah.
So, it's engineers like me who work at companies who are like, why are we still using this archaic material for this? We
Yeah.
can choose to be different, and I think I mentioned before we started here, Subaru in Lafayette uses the packaging that the engines come in from Japan to make the foam for the seats and stuff like that in their cars. So if you design it that way, nothing gets thrown away. And you can be careful and cautious about it, even whether it's a batch process or a continuous process, whether you're vertically or horizontally outlaid as a company or a business. You can make each of those decisions consciously every step along the way. And by making those decisions every step along the way, you can make the world a better place, not because, there's people who necessarily want it to be like that, but there's the people who are in the position to make those decisions who can. And guess what? You can't stop me. You can't look over my shoulder and tell me I'm doing it wrong. You hired me. You paid me money to get the right answer. And if the right answer I tell you is the environmentally responsible one, that's the only answer you get.
Yeah.
So I can make those decisions on an individual basis. And I think a lot of engineers do.
Really?
And, oh yeah. Yeah. And we try to. Now, granted, there's some industries where that doesn't matter,
Yeah.
like defense.
I
There's
was
not a whole
thinking
lot
about
of
defense.
ethical sourcing that happens in the world of defense because at the end of the day, you're just trying to blow people up. The purpose of that industry is not to, stop
save the
buildings. It's
planet.
about stopping people because people are the things doing the things that are the problem for you, whatever your problem is. Not to throw shade on that, but
Well,
no,
but that is kind of true. Like, why would you care about the human impact?
from a
of-
personal point of view, that's how
Yeah.
I choose to view it. That's not the same for everybody, but
That's fair. Yeah, there's maybe somebody who's like, oh, I'm going to use a recyclable cardboard for my.
Sure, or whatever,
Yeah.
So, so I try to do my best that in each of the jobs, and especially in the world of medical stuff, knowing that what I'm working on is potentially disposable,
Yeah.
that the type of waste that I generate is something that somebody can take apart. So there's a few countries that do stuff to try to combat that. So, for example, the WEEE initiative, the WEEE, that is a battery thing where basically in Europe, they incinerate most of their medical trash, right?
Yeah.
So if you can make a thing recyclable that's out of plastic, you could take it apart. But to make things take apartable, there's rules for that, right? So if you can just smash it with a hammer and it fragments into pieces, that's fine. If I can take the battery out and deal with the battery separately, then my disassembly process is literally smash it with a hammer, right? So I can design my thing to have a battery that can be removed without the use of a tool, so that when somebody gets this product and it's the finished product and they have to get the battery out, and that's the part with the dangerous energy in it, well, then they can just slide the thing out and the battery's out. Now you can just disassemble the rest of it with a hammer and you don't care what the fragments are. You know, you just shake the broken glass out, chuck the plastic over your shoulder, and right, you know, so you can properly sort these materials. So in different countries, they will sort the materials of it and then package them and then send them somewhere out of mind and out of sight, you know, to let them deal with it in whatever way they're going to deal with it in the source country they send it to. So that was definitely happening here in the 70s and 80s when nuclear waste was being shipped to Indiana for us to store, and still is. And we just don't have nuclear power, and people fight nuclear power plants here because they're like, ooh, they're scary and nuclear power is bad. And it's like, it generates the least amount of harmful stuff, and eventually that trash that you're talking about is the fuel for the next technology that we will develop that uses that trash as the source of energy, because that's how nuclear power is. So we need to stop being afraid of nuclear power and stop being afraid of, you know, solar power and wind power and all the things that we have accessible, especially in the state of Indiana. These are things that are readily available to us now. And when fossil fuel companies continue to lobby for the use of their materials, what they're really fighting for is their own future, to have a thing that they can own, because you can't own sunlight, you can't own wind, and you know, it's how do you store energy otherwise? So we just use chemical storage of energy. So there's different ways of, again, when you're doing engineering, it's about storing, transmitting, and using energy. So how do you store it? One way to store it is chemically. So they use either big batteries, or there's, you know, salt reactors and thorium reactors that basically are steam engines the same way we've always built steam engines, but you just get the heat from a different source. And then you heat up a big old pile of rock like sand. And once the sand is molten, it tends to want to stay molten. And it stays molten overnight. And then you still have steam production from hot sand later. It doesn't matter that you can only make the hot sand during the day because it stays hot all night. And it lets you still make power all night. So there's solutions that are out there if we choose to do them. It's just we currently don't, for socio-political reasons, which is frustrating. So that's the frustrating part of the engineering.
Well, that was fascinating to me when the author talked about the electric cars. He goes, "Oh, we've had these since the 90s." What?
Oh no, we've had them for over a century.
What?
The first cars that Ford made were electric powered. They were sealed lead acid batteries. So the sealed lead acid battery is the same technology that the Egyptians made, right? They had copper tubs, and they would put strips of lead in there and pour like wine in there, and you get all tingly because you were literally sitting in the middle of a battery that was electrocuting you while you were sitting in it. And they thought it was cool because, you know,
I mean, it is cool.
Right, we have this much wine and we have, right, so we just sit there and tingle and it feels great. And it's a battery is what it is. It's an electrical circuit. So you were part of the electrical circuit, and that's why you felt all tingly, because it was frying your brains.
Great.
So
well, the wine was going to fry my brain either way.
right. So sulfuric acid is really easy to make, and then you make that with lead. So you mix sulfuric acid with lead, and then you can get a current out of it because it tends to drive this out of these electrodes. And that's what makes these sealed lead acid batteries. And then you can recharge them by putting electricity back into it, and it gives off H2 as a gas, and that can be dangerous, but you can collect it. But we do that in our cars today with the sealed lead acid batteries that are in your car. It produces hydrogen, and the way that you recharge the battery is with a dynamo called an alternator, right? So the alternator charges the battery while you're driving around using mechanical power from the explosion of the gasoline in the cylinders driving the, once you get stuff spinning, that's kind of like the mechanical solution. As soon as I can get something spinning, I got energy. Doesn't matter what it is, I got something spinning, we're getting energy.
We can work with this.
We can work with this. So we use that spinny part to make the electricity that charges the battery again. So then when the car is off for a week or whatever, you go and fire it back up and magically your car starts again. And it's not magic. It's just stored electrical energy in a chemical reaction. So we're using these chemical reactions, several of them in the car, as a matter of fact. That's just one of them, the other
Yeah.
one being the combustion reaction to make the car go.
Yeah.
So these are sources of chemical energy that can be stored for long periods of time. So all we have to do is come up with different chemistries that store energy. And that's the idea behind the cellular phone with its chemical storage medium that's there, and with the refrigerator that uses its chemical storage medium, namely the refrigerant that's in there, and the phase changes you get out of it cause these temperature things to happen. But we power it with electricity.
Yeah.
You can run that the other way and have a hot thing in one area, a cold thing in another area, and use that to make electricity. Run the thing backwards.
Yeah.
Because turns out it works.
Turns out hey, we're all along. Yeah, we're good. Hey, the friends we made along the way.
That's right.
It always, damn, it always comes back to you.
That's right. And the only reason we need calc because we have to figure out a time rate of change of energy. Right. So once you start measuring time, now I have to suddenly it's calculus.
Yeah.
You
Can
just
I
went
tell
from
you,
algebra into calculus.
I
Man.
loved calculus.
It's fantastic.
I
It's the only math
loved-
that
it was
actually
so
makes
fun.
sense.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
too bad I
knew
didn't do it.
Newton had it going on.
Yeah.
That Principia
that-
Mathematica.
That
no
Newton
notes.
guy knew what was
Yeah,
up.
that's right. Principia Mathematica, 0 notes. Perfection. This is what autistic kids are doing in the 1600s.
Yeah. Oh God. Okay. We got up. See, I told you, I knew we would get on some sort of tangent that was unrelated. So, okay, guys. So hey, have we solved the world's problems? What do we, so what do we think about, what were your thoughts and what did your table talk about in this the environmental impact of manufacturing? I'm just curious kind of where everybody went with their conversation, with their idea. Because I think there's a lot of different pockets, not only explored in the book, but I think even explored in our daily lives and in our interactions, with manufacturing. And I can always, same girl, same,
Right.
preach it.
100%.
Yeah. Everyone, she's writing the next book. Next one's on her.
That's right.
Unfortunately for you, you are going to be a genius, little girl. Fortunately or unfortunately, burdened with the yoke
Engineering
of
parents.
intelligence.
Yeah, my kids too. I apologize to them daily.
Manufacturers, produce the same sort of pollution. Carbon dioxide, plastic, outlets, whatever it is. Shouldn't that manufacturer and the consumers, whatever that is, be responsible for the waste, which would include all the pollution? Now that what happens, there's carbon dioxide in the whole world. So how do you get the manufacturer, the shareholders, and the consumers of the product be responsible for that product?
I think that's the $1 million question. How do you get the manufacturer, the shareholder, and the consumer to be responsible for the pollution of the product? And I mean, how many recycling bins have you seen pop up at work or in mall, wherever? That's putting the onus on you, right?
Correct.
And then what onus
They're
is,
blaming you for their use of plastic. And
but
if you don't put the plastic back, then somehow it's your fault. I mean, it made sense when I was younger and we had, returnable glass bottles, right?
Re-
So the mass of the
example.
glass and the reusable glass and the washing of the glass and whatever was handled by somebody else. But still, as long as I returned it, then, you'd get your deposit back. And the deposit onerous.
Yeah.
That was the point of it, was for the
Yeah.
deposit to be onerous. The fact that I paid 20 cents for the soda inside and 80 cents for the glass bottle that it came in, right?
yeah,
So I was compelled by that time to take it back. The problem is that as the industry shifted, we got into listening to the American Plastics Council, who was trying to tell us that, hey, in the Society of Plastics Industries, she's like, hey, plastic's just safer for these things because we don't drop glass bottles. We don't have broken glass bottles everywhere. And it's like, what we have, though, is the ability to deal with sand in all of humanity. What we do not have the ability to do with any species on the planet is to deal with plastic.
yeah. No, I mean, and I think it brings up your point brings up a great question on really, if you're the manufacturer, do you really have any incentive to mitigate your pollution, your waste, to deal with that responsibly, or to? You're right. It's almost disincentivized.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess maybe a question for you. Well, actually, I'm going to keep this with you all.
Sure.
Hey, I'm making you solve everyone's problems. No pressure. As a consumer, do you feel like you want, maybe even after reading this book, do you want to make, are you incentivized as a consumer to maybe pay more for the more environmentally responsible choice if you can? Is that something that you're thinking about when you're at Kroger, Meijer, Walmart, whatever? Is that something you think about? I mean, I don't know. Maybe sometimes when
Seeing
it's,
some
is it only
nodding
when it's
heads, yeah.
convenient? Yeah, we have some nodding heads. I mean, I don't know. How do you see that as, and do you think that it should be or is your responsibility, right? How can you hold the manufacturer responsible if not with your dollar, right? Not buying the product, but then it feels like it's putting a lot of work on you. You got to figure out who's making it right, who's right. I mean, doesn't that feel a little backwards? Should there be another responsible party? I guess because it feels listless, right? Like it just.
I think the management's definitely made it clear that they're concerned about their shareholders more than anything else. There have been court cases about that in the last 30 years over and over about, rich dudes suing other rich dudes because they weren't making them enough money.
What?
Yeah, there's plenty of cases like that. Yeah.
I must be just burying my head.
Oh, it's insane. Yeah. I remember watching this stuff on C-SPAN, but originally I was from Erie, Pennsylvania, so I could see the light of the Cuyahoga River burning over the hillside to the west of our town more than once. As a matter of fact, 17 separate times the Cuyahoga River has caught fire from the fabrication of the microplastics, the things that are now microplastics in us that have been released into the environment down the Cuyahoga River. Okay, so because it's in the water supply, it's in the fish, and it's in everything globally because of one factory in one location in the United States, that it's become a global problem.
And
right?
they have what? No responsibility for any of that?
How do you prove it?
Well,
What does proof mean?
yeah.
Right? So when you don't have the science to understand that it's a problem until well after the fact that the company's made the money and the company doesn't even exist anymore.
Well, yeah.
So accountability is a thing that we have to choose to take as a society. And I kind of place the onus for that education on science educators, right? So when we teach science, it is responsible for science education to teach what it's for.
Yeah.
So you can't just teach me how to make a gun. You have to teach me how to make a bandage. You can't teach me just how to make missiles and bombs and stuff like that. You have to teach me how to make medical devices and other things that use literally the same sort of education. So teaching me about the consumption of power should be right next to teaching me the responsibility for the use of that power.
Responsibility.
But
yeah.
that's just in the world of science. Once you get outside of it, there's no onus on the consumer to use their product wisely. So while I built this car to just drive you from one place to another, I didn't build the car for you to have a 7 martini lunch and go wreck it into a bus.
Fair.
So
Fair point. Fair. You know what?
So do I make buses car proof? Do I make cars martini proof? Do I make martinis unavailable at lunchtime?
Yeah.
What part of that falls on each person, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
So I think we're struggling with it, right? And the problem is that technology moves faster than the law does, and that is the case of the law every single time. Is the law seeks to bring justice after the fact rather than being preventive. So science, especially in the world of engineering, has the ability to be preventive. You can think about it. You can put a safety on a gun. You can make it so it's hard to find bullets. You can make it, so each of these things is a separate thing that we can make.
Yeah.
And some of that is intentional and some of that becomes frustrating to a consumer. And you have to draw the line somewhere about use versus utility. So for me to have a job requires high specialization in society.
Yeah.
So the society has to be specialized enough for me to sit around and just think up nerd stuff and get paid to do nerd things.
Yeah.
But if that all collapses, at least, I can do pottery or cook or whatever, there's
Yeah.
like stuff I can do.
Yeah.
But that for us to have cars and cameras and cell phones and that sort of thing, it brings the risk of what's an appropriate amount of screen time.
Well, that's another $1 million question being posed in
I
this
see a
room.
hand going up here in the back.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But something like, which goes with like what shirt it needs to buy, or what pair of shoes might not have that sort of order to not just directly affect me, it directly impacts workers by other ways, and it's harder to get to do the research to then not see.
That's such a good point.
But most of it should be on scientific and also on industry, which are really, really hard to influence, but there's like, that's the biggest,
Or it's even being intentionally obfuscated.
yeah, or being complicated, yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good point that it's so hard to figure out like what company is using better environmentally friendly practices. I mean, absolutely. Yeah. Then, which makes it, yeah. Or greenwashing is how you can't even trust. They go, oh yeah, we're zero carbon. Are you really like that?
Do you ship your product? Then you're not a zero carbon company. I'm sorry. If you,
Thank you.
unless I am coming to pick it up and I teleported there, there was carbon involved in the transmission of that good, period.
Yeah, if you're buying something off of like Amazon.com, and you're like, oh, it's sustainable, it's green. Is it like really 100? Snaps to you because that I had that same thought because what can you do is there's only so much you can
Right.
do as a consumer when I'm like I ripped a hole in my shirt. I need a new shirt. Okay, I'm gonna go look for 7 weeks to research every factory that makes every textile and everything that like what do you want from me really? But that's really the only way it feels like to do it. And I actually, the author in the book talks about how there are technologies that do make the manufacturing process, parts of it at least, maybe more efficient. They make it faster, or they make it with less of a carbon footprint. But when I think of manufacturing, I think of I think you're giant, just like making it by the millions and billions, so efficient, and they're able to they have the capital to invest in that new technology. Something I hadn't thought of really until I read this book was there's a lot of manufacturing operations, they don't have the ability to buy that new technology.
Yeah.
So it's not that they don't want to, they don't know about it, they don't have a way to adopt that technology, and they don't.
Yeah.
So, I mean, from your point of view, because you said you do work in manufacturing that is working on that giant scale.
That's right.
What do you think about the adoption of some of this greener technology?
Sure.
And is it possible on a scale to make a difference?
Yes. I am trapped in this system perhaps more than anyone else is in the room, because you can choose not to participate in any of this stuff, right? You can choose
can
not
go
to have a
off-grid.
phone. You can not have a car,
Ron
whatever.
Swanson it, yeah.
This is how I put food on my table, right? I am into this system of manufacturing. It's a thing that I am in this system hard.
Yeah.
And because I am in this system hard, I also look at myself as being therefore extra responsible for what gets used in these systems. And I take it as a personal sort of mandate to try to make these quote unquote ethical choices.
Yeah.
So in the case of things like our blood glucose testing, where I know I'm throwing a strip away, I can stop using polyester made out of dinosaur juice and start using polylactic acid for those same strips, which is a corn oil base. And that's a decision I can make for the business. And they're going to go, well, we're going to have to revalidate this thing. I'm like, what if it saves you 30% every year? And then they're like, oh, well, I guess thanks for letting us know. We'll save money, right? So all I have to do is package it well. And the packaging of that internally means I now have to develop a whole separate skill set of convincing the people who pay me to do my job, or one way to look at it is they, lean over my shoulder and give me lunch money to get the right answers on their test. I've been doing that my whole life, so I'm used to it, right? So getting paid lunch money for the right answers is the job. So now I'm at the point where they trust my answers so much, I can also try to make the ethically responsible answers, which means I have to take time to go read about stuff and learn where things come from and the supply chain to get there. Because at a certain point, it's hard to call any kind of manufacturing ethical. So it's more like you have to figure out what you can do to alter the system. It is no longer about that I seek to just make this one product better, but rather that I need to warp the system so that it can only provide better choices. And if you tell me the tool by which I do that is to make something affordable, I will make that thing so much cheaper that you'd be an idiot not to follow this path. I will find that thing that is made in such a way that it is actually the best way to have it out of these recycled materials or whatever, and that's what makes it cheaper. So park benches, a great example of a thing that you find around parks, especially all over Indy now. They've got recycled pop bottles and everything, right? So this is literally taking all the HDPE and LDPE plastics that we've been chucking in those bins and wondering what it goes to. And it's these guys who then compact them and re-extrude them to make park benches out of. Trex flooring and decking and stuff like that. Those are made out of these materials, and they use wood pulp with it. So it's the castings of wood. So you would have just had this leftover sawdust, which is its own environmental problem because as it molds and rots, it creates a separate problem. So if you wonder what the air quality issues are in Indiana, it's because, we just cut down the corn at the end of the season and let the field go fallow for a season, right? So
It's rough.
I'm breathing that stuff. Sorry. I mean, you live in Indiana, you develop allergies. It's just a matter of time, right?
Yeah.
So,
we learned that quickly when we moved up here.
so all of this trash then becomes ridiculously affordable if I can use it as a construction material. And humans have been taking just utter garbage laying around and building houses out of it for as long as there's been people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, mud huts, caves, whatever, man. Just this is what we build stuff out of. So there's no reason I can't do that with everything else. So some companies are a little bit more forward about that in certain areas. Apple's got some pluses and minuses about them ethically as a company, but one of the things they do is use aluminum for all the housings of their laptops. And it's the one reason I use a lot of Apple products is because when you're done with an Apple product, you send it back to Apple and they give you cash for it. And they disassemble it and take the pieces out of it. So if they can't reuse that thing that you sent back, they will do their best to recycle every component in there because it is profitable to do so. They are unafraid to charge you up front for how much that laptop is, okay? But they're also unafraid to give you cash for something that to you is just this useless brick at 10 years later and like it doesn't work anymore or whatever. They're like, bro, we got your back.
Yeah.
And I really wish that every manufacturer would do that. A lot of them would buy their own cars back in the day where when you were done with the Buick, you could take it back to the dealership and they would be like, no, man, we're going to run this car into the ground or turn it into something else or whatever. And we can only vote with our dollar. The good news is it's a vote you can make every day.
Yeah.
And so there's some of that, but we're still trapped in the same system of capitalism that you are. And we can still only vote the same way that you vote. But the rest of it, I think, has to be taken with a certain degree of civic responsibility.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I try to show up for these things as much as I can, is because I want to impress on people that the civic responsibility that we have can be based in science. And that if we have more science-based education out there, the people out there making choices can use scientific bases for the decisions they make instead of emotional ones.
Yeah.
And it's not just, I want to do better for the environment, but there's a real practical reason about how we do this and what that means.
Yeah.
So when we talk about, oh, I don't want nuclear power here, you just don't understand nuclear power. It's got way better efficiencies and so many, there's so many advantages to it that the only problem is that it makes a future fuel that you can't really do anything with now as a waste. And while that waste is toxic and kind of annoying, we still have ways of sticking it several hundred feet under the ground and not being a problem. And I can promise you that 500 kilograms of radioactive material is way easier to store than 8,000 to 8 million tons of coal ash, per unit, year, or month, depending on which way you want to slice that.
Yeah.
Yeah, coal ash is
ask
really hard to
Northern
deal with.
Indiana.
Yeah, that's right. So coal ash is really hard to store, and you can't do anything with it. It's carbon-12. Carbon-12 loves being carbon-12. It doesn't want to be anything else. So unless you can figure out what to do with that, you've got problems. So this, kilos of radioactive material is sometimes easier to deal with. But anyway, that's beyond the scope of this. That's just a general thing that's popular in the news that people talk about is power production. And this is the real problem. And that's because you get an energy bill every month, right? So that's forward in a lot of people's minds. Most people aren't going to be like, oh, wow, he gets the Altoids because they use, renewable resources for where they get their wood alcohol from that is in the diet mint, if you will. Not that the svelte figure is not built by mints. But it comes in a steel container, right? So this is all 100% recyclable, and it's not even using sugar. It's using some wood alcohols to make the artificial sugar that's in it. So that's a decision I'm making as a consumer because I have enough science and understanding of chemistry and manufacturing about how these things are made. That's a choice I make for me. And I can encourage others to make the choice, but that requires each person to get their own science education about what is relevant to their needs. And it sounds like we have some pretty educated folks out here who are making decisions based on, some real science. I don't want to expose myself to, the glyphosates and other things that are floating around out in the environment, or I don't want to watch the Cuyahoga River burn anymore, right? I mean, it's
All good things.
Yeah.
All good things. Yeah. Before, I don't want to get too deep. There's so many different avenues I feel like that this author goes into. I'm curious for you guys, whether you read the book or even if you've just, listened to this discussion, what aspect of this book or about manufacturing maybe was new for you from this book or really got you interested? Or was this like all old hat? You were like, I already knew all this. Was there any part of the book that was most interesting, I guess, to you, or that you enjoyed, or that you hated? You were like, I wish I didn't know this. I really liked learning about the different trees that are involved in toilet paper. Not something I would have ever learned in any other aspect of my life. Not really I guess it's manufacturing.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting. I don't know. Yeah.
Offshoring.
Offshoring.
So I made my first trip to China in 1985. I
Wow.
didn't know how to build anything. Buildings were shabby, the light bulbs were dim, there was no power. Waiters didn't know how to set a table. It was just, nobody knew how to do anything. Now they've got the most sophisticated.
Yeah.
Also the Japanese and Korean, because they all talk.
Yeah.
They have all manufacturing capability over there now. A lot of it is not here anymore, it's there.
Yeah.
They learn how to do all this. So we forget it. So he does bring it up in the book.
He does bring up the offshoring and the fact that, you're right. Chinese manufacturing has changed a lot over, a period of 40 years. And that if you asked an American company, hey, don't buy it from a Chinese manufacturer, make it here, they couldn't do it.
Look at Intel.
Intel.
They made the high-end semiconductors. They made
Yeah.
processors. They had over in Asia somewhere, they were making the cheaper memory parts.
Yeah.
Well, you can't make those microprocessors here, but we don't know how.
Yeah.
It's all done in Taiwan.
Yeah. No, you can't do it anymore. The author talks about has huge implications. And it seems like, and he talks about it in the book. This book was only published, I think, 2 years? Yeah, 25. So yeah, it was not published very long ago. And I think if you've read the news over the last year, there's been a big push from, the
happening, or
It's
you
both,
can't just turn on a switch, right? And it's just like, "Oop, it's back on." I don't know.
So every job I've had over the last 30 years has involved me teaching somebody somewhere else how to do my job for less. So that statement is true. So, but what is also true is that a lot of places now realize that after they've built up places like Shenzhen and Guangzhou, that didn't used to be anything other than just, villages by a river. And now they're the premier microelectronics manufacturers in the world. They too have a middle class. So they didn't have a middle class. So once they built that socially, those people demanded things of their government to make their quality of life better, which drove their wages up. and became the same sort of quote unquote problem that they have now, which is, oh, well, crap, now the price of manufacturing is kind of the same everywhere, which is actually kind of good for us, because what they're realizing now is there are things that we do here that aren't done in other countries. So because of the profit motives that are around healthcare in the United States, we continue to develop things that a lot of other countries might not have developed in the world of medical care. So it does help us in the fact that there are companies here that build stuff, especially here in Indiana. I was talking with Incog earlier today, as a matter of fact, up in Fishers, and they do fluid handling, and they're a CDMO, one of these places that are, you know, we take your magic juice and we put it into a container that has a needle with a button on it, so you can stick it up against your body and push the button and get the juice in your body, right? That's what they do. So that's a thing, and they started as a company of 20 people, and then 50 people, and 100 people, and now they're over 400, and they've made a deal with Fishers that they're going to be over 1,000 employees by 2029, and they've been, you know, one of Indiana's best employers over the last 4 years running, and they've been operating for 6 years. So it can happen. Another good success story is in Lebanon. Festo, Linear Motion Controls Corporation, makes Festool. And so that is like high quality woodworking stuff for like cabinet making and things like that. They're the most expensive that you can buy, and they are worth every penny. And I kid you not, they're German designed by Linear Motion Controls experts there in Germany, Festo Controls Corporation. But they build all the hand tools, all the stuff for cabinetry and that sort of thing in Lebanon, Indiana. And the Germans are like, no, we can't get a better quality of labor for this kind of money anywhere else in the world than we can for Lebanon, Indiana. And so those people have jobs. So we are bringing these manufacturing, right? You know, Subaru International of America in West Lafayette is another one of my favorite examples of a company that is just steadily added employees and grown and made better and better quality cars, and you know, they make more cars every year, and you can't put them down. You can't even slow them down. Manufacturing for Toyota in Nicholasville, Kentucky, and the Honda plant that is just down the road from my house in Greensburg, Indiana. They've been making Civics there for 12 years now, 14 years, something like that. And then, of course, the Accord plant and almost all the Honda SUVs and the Odysseys being made in Marysville, Ohio, you know, just an hour and a half from here. So that's been happening. It's just the names of the companies that were these American companies were like, oh, we're going to go after profitability. So we're going to stop being vertically oriented and become more horizontally oriented. And when they did that, they went after the cost of labor because they thought that busting the unions was necessary to get the price of the vehicles down. When in fact, the real cost of these businesses is the salaries of the people who run the place. So the reason they're successful in a lot of other countries is because those countries literally have laws that you can't make more money than this. Period. If you make more money than this, you won capitalism. So here's your prize. We will now tax you at 100% of your income past this value. And we used to do that here in the United States. We just don't anymore. So if we would choose to go back to that stuff, the way that the tax structures were in, say, 1951, you know, where people would be paying those taxes, if we made these folks penalized for being the sociopaths that they are, then we would lift all of society together. So a rising tide lifts all boats only when there's water to float all the boats, instead of one water tower hogging it all.
Well, and the author does talk about a little bit about how labor and the cost of labor and the exploitation of labor plays into this, because you're right, it lowers price. That gets into a lot of diplomacy, and you know how trade agreements are negotiated, and even the influence of unions on those trade agreements. It's very interconnected and very fascinating. When I got to the end of this book, one of the things I realized and hadn't really considered was how deeply interwoven into just the fabric of our daily lives. So like this, which is so complex, and it's so complex, and the scale of it. Like think about the process that you're talking about, or the processes that the author talks about to make a single product.
Oh yeah.
Not even shipping the product. Just think about the making of a single product, getting to your grocery store. Walk into a Target, a Kroger, Walmart, and the variety of products, and each one of those has how many different components in each product, and each of them got shipped to how many different locations to be, it just, the scale and magnitude of it is just, it's mind numbing. And then when you add in, oh, well, that, this plays into the trade agreements we have, and, this is how the unions feel about the import of steel and aluminum, but it's like, it just, the sheer scale of it is mind boggling to me. And this book, I think, really put that in perspective. And I think using COVID-19 as like an anchor for kind of the storyline of the book is a really nice way to base it in what is, for us reading this now, a recent reality. I think if you read this book 10 years from now, I think I would have a totally different interpretation and experience of it, just because it's so based in the recent events. I like that, but I don't know, maybe other people feel differently. I'm happy to hear it. Is there anything else that anybody felt like this book, maybe we didn't touch on, that you're like, Allison, how could you have not talked about this? How could you not talk about millions of cookies and Twinkies being made, Allison?
Can I go a little more in here?
Yeah,
Artificial intelligence. So
and
he-
we're all,
He brings that up.
he talks about AI.
On the side, he's not really, spending enough time on it.
You know what, but I will say that we've read a lot of AI books, and I feel like the things he was hitting on, I was like, oh, we've talked about this. Like, we've talked about this in other books, we've touched on this in other books. I feel like it would deserve its own book, like AI and manufacturing. And I think that's something, again, you could write that book today. In 2 years from now, it wouldn't even be relevant, right? Because whatever they talk about now, whatever's cutting edge today, is going to be in my phone in 2 years. And it's going to be on google.com in 6 months. It's the pace of it, I think, almost makes it hard to talk about in something like this.
That's what I thought. He probably did the research in about 23, 24, published the book in 25. It wasn't as big a thing. Then, he did it already.
What do you think about the integration of AI into manufacturing, and maybe what the author talks about, or even your experience? I mean, has it been happening before we even knew about it? I mean,
Yeah, I think it's certainly on the design side. So people in design of things has been using AI.
in
specifically.
design,
Yeah.
I would have assumed it'd be on the other side of it. What?
So thinking of my favorite example comes from the world of Formula One. So Formula One racing, where money is in basically infinite supply, and you're only making 7 of a thing, because you have 7 cars that you're driving, 3 of them that hit the track, and the other 4 are in development. Yeah, so they want to get ounces out of the car, not pounds of weight. They've already gone past the point where they,
Yeah.
right. So to win a race, it's a power to weight ratio thing. It's another one of those things. I have a limited amount of power, and so I want to get it as light as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And the problem with making it light is that it doesn't really want to stick to the ground very well. So then you turn the car into a whole wing, which is the faster it goes, it shoves the car down onto the ground harder.
Yeah.
Okay, so that means you can start getting rid of additional weight.
Yeah.
So the way that they do that is, my favorite example was for one of the front linkages on the steering mechanism, and this would be the thing that controls the live steering and the camber of the wheel itself. So how much of the wheel is in contact with the ground. So that's normally made of several pieces that are sort of bolted together. So if you're doing that, that means you have a connection point, and you have a joint, and you have the fastener that holds it together. So if I make it of 3 pieces, I have 3 things I have to make, and then I have the weight of the fasteners.
Yeah.
I have the weight of the things that hold the fasteners in place to keep them
It's a lot
from
extra
rattling
weight.
out. What happens if I just make this out of 1 piece of metal? So how do I make that out of 1 piece of metal? So what they did is they put the loading conditions, because you can just measure this on the track. They put accelerometers at the various connection points and did some science and measured what the loads were. And then they put those loads into a computer, and they're like, okay, take as much metal away from this and have it survive these loading conditions that are dynamic over the course of the track. So then you do Monte Carlo simulations. So you do minor variations, right? So you're like, okay, well, I told it was 1 pound this way. What if it's 0.8 pounds this way? And I add a pound, a tenth of a pound this way. And So you allow these perturbations to happen, which are the equivalent of the person turning on the track, or, you know, the car tipping around, or they're driving over the berm, or whatever. You know, so all these minor perturbations that you can put in there, and then you have it run the simulation again, and then the computer just reruns the same thing over and over with all these minor perturbations in there. And then it theorizes about what is the most likely outcome for the shape of this thing. When they were done, that joint looked like a scapula from a bird. It looked like a living bone of a creature. And this is how you know that evolution had billions of years to work on a thing when engineers had weeks to work on it.
Yeah.
So by using the computer simulation and AI, you give it the conjecture of the most likely load path that the load bearing takes through that hunk of metal, and then it only uses the metal it needs to have there and gets rid of the rest of the metal. And that it ends up looking like a bone from an animal, a clavicle, a scapula, something like that. It blew my mind. So the first time I saw that, that was really, truly optimized. Now, how do you make something that's all weird and swoopy, right? So everything around us that is computer shaped is all flat and rectangles and cylinders and other basic shapes, because that's how we figured out how to do manufacturing.
Yeah.
Well, the next wave in manufacturing is everything's going to be swoopy, right? It's got to be that kind of optimization. So that means manufacturing use of AI is, how do I handle a swoopy thing that isn't hand shaped? So right now we build tools that are human shaped because humans use tools. What if I can build a robot that doesn't have hands and uses magnetic fields to move things, or it uses air to move a thing, or it uses, you know, sonic repulsion fields to handle a thing? Yeah, so you don't have to touch the thing. You can use sound to literally move small objects. So there are nano assembly technologies that use nothing more than sound waves to manipulate particles into the place they need to be.
Okay.
Right. So, but you have to envision that. How do I touch?
Just simply.
How do I touch a thing without touching a thing? You have to ask. That's what engineering is all about.
Schrodinger's touch. Am I touching it?
But that's, you know, so spooky action at a distance has always scared physicists, but engineers, we don't care. I will touch things at a very far distance without actually touching it if you give me a magnetic field.
I don't like this.
So the same radio technology that exists that we had radio in cars is the same technology to put a wire into a package, so I can walk up to a pallet full of hair dryers and wave my cell phone over it, and it can tell me how many products are there, and it'll tell me the serial number of every single hair dryer on that pallet without me having to crack open 200 boxes to figure out what's in there. So that's the same technology. Why would I need that information? Logistics. I need to know how many hair dryers I'm shipping from someplace overseas and getting it in the store, and how many of these I have in inventory, so that when somebody goes up to the cash register and swipes it out, they aren't just telling you which product you bought, but the serial number of the one that you got, and we know which pallet it came from, and then we know that somebody bought it. And then if there's something wrong with that hair dryer, we can send an email to that person that says, hey, we found out that 75 of these hair dryers that were on that pallet are going to explode when you plug them in at home. Don't do that.
Yeah.
So it's a safety concern. These are all sorts of applications for this. Nobody in their wildest dreams is like, I need to track this can of beans, until you realize that, you know, botulint's a thing, and food processing is hard, especially in volume. So the bigger you make this, the problem, the bigger you make the solution, the bigger the problems become.
And we didn't even have time to get into the data and the volume of data and what that means and how it's used and how I would argue the next piece of it's not even, I guess, the downstream of manufacturing is the value of your data using that thing, whether it's easier to think of digitally, than physically, but the value of you as a data point and the data that you contribute simply by existing and moving and using items is, again, mind-boggling. And if we've even taught some of the books we read before have touched on this.
Yeah, when I read this,
it's terrifying.
I made a bunch of notes on manufacturing science. Like, we can have a whole other talk if you want to at some point about just the manufacturing science.
There's an entire seminar, there's an entire college course, 3 credits in this book worth of things we could go off of. I know we're at time. So I just thank you, Matt, for your expertise and your insight and Thank you for waiting until the end to give me the real weird part that, because there's always like of all these books, there's like a part that I go, this is scary. This is where, hey, I take my hands off the wheel. It's Jesus's turn because I cannot deal with this anymore. My brain cannot compute this concept anymore. And I'm glad you waited till the end because people like Barrett who come in and he's, I mean, not to spoil it. Every time Barrett comes, and I tell him that I've said this to his face. I said, I hate you because you scare me. So thank you for waiting till the end.
Oh, no,
Scare me.
absolutely.
And thank you guys for coming. In 3 weeks, because we, delayed this,
Shorter
in
than
3 weeks, we are coming back and for our Valentine's Day special, we're going to be reading Bonk by Mary Bonk by Mary Roach. It has been a while since we have talked to Mary, and I am. If you have not started that book, and if you're nervous about it because it is so spoilers, it's a book about sex. It's Mary Roach. If you've not read a Mary Roach book, you're in for a treat. And if you have, it is her same style. It's fun. It's light. It's not going to be weird. It's going to be fun. And I already started giggling. I already started laughing. Didn't even get through one chapter, and I was like, this is going to be hilarious. So please join us in 3 weeks for Bonk and enjoy Mary Roach. We always have a good time, I feel like, when we read Mary. So I'd be like, I know her. I'm like, hey, Mary, what's up? So thank you guys for coming. Stay warm out there, stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Bye. It's always something that scares the shit out of me. The thought of moving things with sound. I don't know why. That scares the shit out of me.